Welcome back to the Big Data Show, everyone. I'm your host, Nate Latimer. This show, we talk about all things that are big data related, big tech, artificial intelligence, what's coming next in the world. And I'm very excited about today's guest, dear friend of mine, Mr. David Monnier. He's the CIO and Chief Evangelist of Team Cymru. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks for having us.
So you talk to us a little bit about Team Cymru itself. Like, what does the company do overall? Like, what's the nutshell version? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So we're a threat intelligence provider. So most of the security products that people, your listeners, are probably used to using, they're informed by the intelligence that we collect. So we collect, 800,000 pieces of malware every day. We detonate that. We detonate that malware, observe it. We do dynamic and static analysis of that, and we pull out indicators of compromise, so think domains, IP addresses, that type of information, and we monetize that by helping other businesses, make their security products better. But then what we discovered was that kind of the carrier, the transit world, the ISPs of the world, IXPs, that they needed this insight. So, for example, if you float a cable across the ocean, that's expensive. We're talking, $1 million a mile type of stuff. Yeah, right. And we help them maximize the utility of that by helping them remove unwanted traffic. In return, what we get is the ability to kind of ask questions of that same data. So what we do is we provide what you could think of as signal intelligence, commercially available for either threat reconnaissance, which is identifying adversaries and seeing what their next moves are, but also we help people understand victimology, like what's happening on the internet. When someone says a problem is bad, well, how bad is it really? Well, we can tell you. We also go pretty far into kind of the trust communities that you could think of, the secret cabal that makes the internet work, if you will.
So you guys are like B2B to protect the C almost, right? So business to business, protecting the consumers and end users on behalf of the businesses that work with you guys.
Yeah, that's a big piece of it. And then we also do direct business. So like, for example, financial services industry, they have different types of adversaries than, say, a home person, right? So we help them understand the adversaries that they're facing, what their tools and tactics are, where they're hiding, if you will. So we help good guys watch bad guys so that they can conduct proactive efforts to secure their networks.
Interesting. Very cool. So, there's obviously a lot going on in the AI world right now,
Sure.
This whole AI boom. So, I think it'd be interesting for a lot of the viewers to understand the way you guys can, prevent those threats at a consumer level and also at a business level. So, if it's a consumer level, people will use like VPNs to, try to protect themselves online. You've got antivirus solutions on your computer, prevent malware, things of that nature. So, at a consumer level, where do you think we are today versus where do you think we're going to be after everything that's going on with this AI boom?
Yeah, so, I'll say up front, I'm not a huge fan of AI as a silver bullet. I think that we're still living in a world where most people don't actually even understand what they're doing,
Sure. Let
alone how they're doing it. And as a result, I think we're in what I would describe as a tricky situation. Anytime a new technology emerges, there's going to be people who race to that technology because it's flashy, because it's interesting, things like that. And then there's also going to be people who race to it because they know they can sell it because they know it's not very well known. Well, when you're talking about security, in particular consumer security, right? If we were to go out and poll people on the street and say, tell me how email works, they would use words like click or open or send.
Sure.
And what they wouldn't talk about is SMTP, which is the protocol that actually makes mail work. They wouldn't talk about IMAP, which is the protocol that lets you read email. They wouldn't talk about IP addresses. They wouldn't talk about domain name resolution. They wouldn't talk about any of the things that actually make it work. So when you have a scenario where at the same time no one understands it, but everybody's exceptionally reliant on it, right? For example, if you go to do banking today, if you want to talk to a human being at the bank, that sometimes costs you like $1 or $2 just to actually speak to a human being, but online banking is free. So when you have this kind of, what I hate to call it a perfect storm because it's actually exceptionally unideal of a storm, but when you have a scenario like that where capitalization of the process is designed where they're driving out what they consider to be low costs, which is, the bank tellers, for example, it makes for a mess. And, it's important that consumers understand that many of the people even who are making the technologies happen for them, even many of them don't know. Like if you were to sit down and talk to, your CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer for your financial institution, unless you're with one of the big guys like JPMC or Bank of America or something like that, if you're at like a credit union, it's a good chance that your CISO who's responsible for the safety of your data, they probably couldn't tell you how something as simple as encryption works for a website. They know that you have to buy a certificate, but beyond that, they don't really know. So,
and would you attribute most of that just based on generations? Younger people are so second nature to them that they grew up around, just knowing that it just works that way and not having to understand how it really works.
That's certainly a factor. That's certainly a factor. I think it's more driven by the fact that businesses are trying to reduce the cost of business at the expense of, safety, largely digitally. So everybody thinks of technology as this is going to be a time saver, this is going to be a money saver, this is going to be you name it saver. But in reality, if nobody truly understands the things, you're kind of rolling the dice. Like maybe you're saving time now, but you're going to have some kind of disaster later. So, but what I would mostly attribute it to is a lack of humans available to fill the niche. Counter to regulatory components requiring people to fill those roles. So what you end up with is, I hate to describe them as checked boxes, but you end up with people who may be academically applicable to the problem, but as far as experience or actual knowledge or know-how, they're not. So frankly, I hate to say it in a negative connotation, but there's just not enough hackers in the world.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think it was CyberSeek recently said there's 770 million cybersecurity jobs that just are unfilled.
That's right.
And then talking about whether or not they're going to be filled by, non-humans. So with, it seems a lot more feasible to fill those roles that way, especially considering, quantum computing coming out and how rapidly all this stuff is evolving. So, what's your take on that? Like, where do you think it's going to be?
So I do foresee a future where AI and, in particular, once quantum computing becomes reasonably priced, because today, I'll tell you right now, a supercomputer is expensive. Everyone thinks of ChatGPT as the website that you interface with it, but I can assure you on the back end, there's, hundreds of thousands of computational hours that go into every single request. Wow. So, but at scale. So what you have is like massively parallel computation on the back end. So it gives you the illusion of fast time. But if you were to put all those calculations end to end, you would see it actually equivalent to hours of what's called CPU time. So, but where I see this all going is, I think the lowest fruit or the lowest level of tasks will be filled by AI because there are effective machine learning models today that do determine probabilities for fraud, things like that. I think that AI is going to go very far towards matching what you could think of as anomalous events, so prioritization at the security operations center level, things like that. But there's a catch to this. So if we create an environment where machines are doing the lowest level work, I would ask the world, well, where is your middle and your expertise going to come from if you eliminate the on-ramp into the occupation? And though we may be thinking that we're saving money and we're saving time now, I would argue we're not going to end up saving money in the long run because you're going to create an environment where expertise becomes more of a unicorn because there is no ladder to climb, where you basically have to already start at the top of the ladder. And though I don't personally mind because I'm one of the wizards that knows all this magic, right? So I can, double my income just because the competition in the marketplace goes away as far as employment goes. But for a consumer, they should be concerned with this. At the end of the day, if you cut off the bottom of your family tree, you're eventually, not going. The tree won't grow anymore.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's interesting how I talk to, like my dad or my uncle, aunt, about artificial intelligence, or even people my age, with kids. The kids that are into art and, they see like all these, just AI tools coming out to where, art is just, being reproduced by artificial intelligence. So, what advice would you give to the consumer, really, on how to prepare themselves for, jobs being replaced that are the mundane tasks that could easily be done by artificial intelligence? What would you tell those people?
Well, I mean, from the perspective of job seekers, I would say, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Dirty Jobs from Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe.
I saw a few episodes.
Yeah, great guy. I love his approach to everything. But he did an episode once with a guy who was cleaning out septic tanks, and this is dirty work, right? Nobody wants to do that. And he asked the guy, like, how did you get involved in this? And he said, well, at the time, everybody was getting into, and I don't recall what specifically, what vertical people were pursuing at the time. But he said, I looked at what direction the crowd was going, and then I went the other direction, because I knew that as they moved away from one thing, there was going to be demand, right? So, and this guy's, multimillionaire and now on this show. So to job seekers, I would say, let the AI thing happen. And, don't assume that you have to focus on AI. Because you know what? AI is never going to put a roof on your house. AI is never going to fix your toilet. AI is not going to fix your car. AI is probably not going to correct an error in your taxes in the sense of creative erroring, where ways to pay less taxes. AI can tell you if you have a generic issue with your tax form, but AI can't do the kind of human element. So I would say for everyone else who maybe isn't a job seeker but just has to live in the world where AI exists, I would say get ready, brace yourself, because all those things are largely out of your control. You don't get no one said, I want to have to pay money to talk to to go back to the bank teller. No one said, I want to have to pay money to talk to a human for the people who are holding onto my money. The banks decided that. So society is largely going to be dictated to them how much AI is in their life. And they need to be prepared. And, not to sound like a Luddite, though I largely am, I'm convinced we're one corona mass ejection away from, needing to know how to grow tomatoes again because Publix will be closed, but be ready, because the reality is as we have further reliance on technology, the more potential there is for that technology to disrupt your actual, what we call in cyber, your meat space life, right?
Sure.
And that's really all that actually matters. No matter what you're doing in your life, no matter how much electronic impact or activity you have in your life, at the end of the day, really the only thing that matters is real life.
Sure, yeah. And it's funny you mentioned a pandemic injection away from. So shifting gears a little bit, staying on the same topic, Sam Altman recently was talking about global passports and iris scanning of your eyes when traveling. What's your take on that, and the potential dangers on society really at a global level? What are your thoughts on that? I'd be interested to know.
So there's the obvious, all of our eggs in one basket risk. We face that presently with fiat currencies and things like that anyway. I mean, it's, arguable that we already have that scenario. But there is this notion of convenience, right? It's going to be very tricky to take somebody's iris and have it still be functional so that you could do a biometric scan to make it usable, right? So there's those kind of obvious things that would help in life. Help in the sense that it'll save you time. You don't have to carry a wallet. You won't have to do those things. But the thing that caught me about their press release for it is that they touted the anonymity of it. And I would argue that that's can't possibly be true for a number of factors. One is you can't put value into a system anonymously truly. Blockchain and things like that. There are companies out there that specialize in attribution when it comes to the utility of those things. But aside from that, you can't really go out and function in the world as a human being without leaving some type of pattern, which you could think of as a pattern of life, right? Like if you go to Starbucks every day and you go to the same 3 Starbucks stores at a specific window of time based on the rest of your schedule, I hate to tell you, but you're going to be a group of a very small number of people. There's only so many people who routinely go to those same 3 places at that same time.
Process of elimination deduced down to the answer.
Precisely. And, and Sherlock Holmes, though a fictional character, those aren't unique skills. So there are people out there. So the part that kind of caught me by surprise was their claim that adoption of this mechanism was going to afford some type of individual privacy, because I just don't see that as technically feasible. I mean, a determined observer will find you. And that's just, the truth of the matter. So now for the regular person who's determined to identify you, probably nobody, So we are talking about a, minuscule percentage of the population. But if being uninteresting was part of your security model, I have news for you. That's not security. That's obscurity.
Sure.
That's a different thing altogether.
Yeah. You had mentioned something to me before about really the only way to, I guess not be tracked, and whether it's your behavior online, your purchasing habits, whatever. The only way to do that is just to not go on the internet at all. So I guess what is your definition of truly being off the grid versus, there's so many different ways you could be tracked. You could be tracked by your browser history, cookies,
Sure.
There's a ton of different ways. Your mobile advertiser ID on your cell phone.
Sure.
All of those different ways, tracking geolocation, facial recognition cameras all over the place. How do you truly get off the grid?
Well, I would draw on my understanding of adversarial tradecraft. So you could think of burner phones. So the apparatus that you get online with is routinely discarded, either at the basic access level where you're using eSIMs and things like that, and that type of aspect to it. Aside from that, you have to have some type of currency. You have to be able to engage with the rest of the world. So then you're getting into transferable payment cards. There's a number of them out there that allow you to take, for example, Bitcoin and convert it into a Visa card. That type of effort. There is a purposeful effort to kind of corral life's activities into these things because it saves businesses money, right? They don't have to count money. There's a bunch of reasons that they drive us to these things. Absolutely. And you would have to think to yourself, what are all the different ways that I'm being corralled into these trackable methods of doing business or of life, and how do I, circumvent them? I'd rather not, run a 101 on how to hide from people because the mistakes of the adversaries in the world are what I leverage personally. So I don't want to turn it into that. But I can tell you that it is possible for people to at least make it more difficult. But I will tell you it is not possible to be leaving no fingerprint electronically. That's simply not possible.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess getting back to AI, you mentioned you're not the biggest fan of AI. What don't you like mainly about AI versus what do you like about AI? Because for me, I'm a fan of AI. Sure. I love the efficiency of it. I love the scalability of it that it offers to business. So just curious of your opinions on either side.
Technically, I think AI is fantastic. I think AI can spot anomalies unlike any human being ever would. I think it's a magnificent capability that AI, for example, doesn't get bored, doesn't get tired, doesn't get, in our application, so think Security Operations Center, right? So if logs are streaming past you and you're looking for anomalous events in that, after like 20 minutes, your eyes are going to glaze over, right? So your chances of looking at that is zero. So I'm a fan of it in that regard. What I really don't care for about AI is two-part. One is it completely, similar to the example I gave earlier, where does entry-level jobs come? Where do they come from, and where does true expertise come from if you eliminate the opportunity to get started somewhere? That's a big problem, and I hate to tell you, but they have that saying, "Idle hands are the devil's friend," or something like that.
Devil's playground.
If you unemploy millions or tens of millions of people globally and they don't have anything good to do, I have news for you. They'll do something bad. So I don't like that aspect of it. I'm very much I wouldn't say I'm a populist by any means, but I am a person who has other people in mind all the time. I live my life with the idea of, how can I help? What can I do for people? Maybe I'm an idiot. I don't know, but I would like to believe I'm not in that regard. But what I dislike the most about AI is the woo, the woo-woo factor of it. I dislike the fact that there is a lot of charlatanism of people who are out telling people things that just simply aren't true about AI, making promises that it will never uphold. Now, is it malice? Not necessarily.
It's just ignorance for the most part, or pompous,
or naivety, where they truly believe the things they're saying. They believe in some utopian future where it's like Star Trek, right? But the reality is like, who built the first replicator? Well, it was probably a human, to use a Star Trek example. But without that, you're never going to get there. So what I would say is AI is tricky because it's competing with humans, and frankly, we compete with enough with ourselves. We probably don't need the competition, not in that regard, and it's a lot of snake oil right now. So unfortunately, people go to work for companies thinking, oh, this is the next big thing, when actually it's not going to be the next big thing. People leave their companies to go get jobs at places where they think is going to be, hey, this is going to be the next Google, and it turns out not at all. It's it's going to be the next Blockbuster instead. And those factors are significant.
Interesting, yeah. So I guess let's shift over a little bit to more so the commercial side of things. So, in security, let's talk about like data breaches. There's plenty of the famous ones. Was it Analytica? There's of course Facebook, and there's Experian breach. So like when those sort of things happen, since you guys look out for those sort of things, what does that process look like in helping those companies, prevent it from happening again? And I'm going somewhere with this. I'm just curious for your answer.
Okay. Well, a lot of what we do is help people understand, or not necessarily understand, but at least illuminate the adversary that they're facing. Right? There's a bunch of different categories of threat actor that are around on the internet. So you have your what you could think of as just your opportunistic person who commits electronic crime just simply because they can. Then you have kind of the economic category. So think of this as like organized crime, where like this is their business. And then you have nation-state actor, where they're in pursuit of either intellectual properties to further their own domestic interests, or they're in pursuit of domestic things, that have their interests. So a lot of your defensive posture is reliant on your ability to understand who's the adversary that you're facing.
Exactly.
So, and that's where we come in. So a lot of what we do is to provide illumination. Again, think of it in the sense of like, who hacked you, why, identify where did they come from.
Yeah, there's a motive
And then, well, we don't really get into motive, right, because we don't work in content. We work more at the metadata level. So we are more like this IP spoke to this IP. But once you know that an IP is a threat to you, let's say something probed your network, if I can show you who's managing that IP, then you can do what's called a pivot. You can pivot off of that and see what else they manage, and you could start to create a proactive security posture. So that's how we help people, is we help them understand what did the adversary do. So they have their local visibility, right? They have their enterprise logs, they have their firewall, they have whatever that they picked up, but we share with them global insight that they couldn't possibly get aside from us. So think, to use an analogy, imagine if your Ring doorbell or your alarm system in your house could somehow draw on the rest of the doorbell cameras down the street or the rest of the alarm systems in your neighborhood, and help you to understand what our adversaries doing to somebody else before they come to you. Well, that's one application of it. But in addition to that, like when they leave your house, when they from breaking in your house, what if you could track where they went and then see where their fort is and what else, where else they break into from there and things like that.
Tracking somebody down based on their IP, what's your opinion on how accurate that truly is? If they can change all the time, or maybe it's somebody else using the device.
IP address is managed by something called DHCP scope, and the kind of the scenario that you're describing is largely limited to mobile networks. There's what's called network address translation, often employed in the form of what's called carrier NAT. So think massive amounts of people behind a single IP. So that's one of the scenarios. Mobile networks where, as you move from one cell tower to another tower, those things may change. There's not a lot of tolerance in network protocols for that, though. So in particular, cryptographic protocols, SSL, things like that, they don't handle those changes very easily. So in a lot of residential networks and places like that, your IP actually doesn't change very often. If you were to monitor for, like here in our area, we have, Spectrum is a large provider here, formerly Bright House. Their IPs, your residential IP probably only changes once every 6 months or so. So the idea that IPs change rapidly isn't wholly accurate. And in the instances where it does, there are other components to it, as I described this kind of pattern of life, right? You can start to, with enough data over time, you can start to establish
track record. Yeah,
sure.
Put the puzzle pieces together. So
a triangulation.
The VPNs get in your way though. Whenever you're referencing IPs,
no, not necessarily either. So VPN, typically, the standard VPN provider is you connect to the VPN provider through a cryptographic tunnel that ensures that nobody in between that had packet level access could see what was in the communication, but it doesn't actually afford any anonymity. Your communication to the VPN provider is encrypted from snooping, but it isn't hiding your actual location to the VPN provider, for starters. But if with enough visibility, if you can see on both sides of the VPN provider, which in a lot of cases, you connect to an IP and then that IP connects to where you're trying to get to. So if you could see all three of those pieces using timing, you could actually draw it together and say, well, this is the communication. This is who that actually was. Now, there are VPN networks, VPN-esque networks like the Onion Router Project, also sometimes called Tor, where they make efforts to actually provide an anonymity by like bundling things together in what are called circuits. They bundle these together and like multiple people's communications will get stuffed together in the same tunnel, for lack of a better description, between nodes, so it makes it much harder for that. But I can tell you that there's only a few of those like true obfuscation networks that exist. Most of the VPN in the world people should think of as trivially defeated in the form of trying to provide any type of anonymous activity, and that the real advantage of it is to where, for example, if you were at a coffee shop, someone stood up a rogue wireless access point, you connected to it where they were actually sniffing all the communications. That's what a VPN is useful for. Hiding online, not so much.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, really the bad actors whenever it comes to what could potentially happen. with the growth of AI. So let's talk about like attacks on IoT, Internet of Things, like a car being hacked because of the telematics within the vehicle, the computer itself. Or a refrigerator now is even a computer
Sure.
connected to the internet, like hijacking planes, just what preventative measures do you take or foresee? Like, I mean, how is that being prevented? Whether it be a company like Team Cymru or the government, like how safe are we from that sort of thing happening? I guess to take that even further, with quantum computing coming out so strong, breaking through like decrypting like MD5 hash encryption or SHA or like some of that just crazy complicated stuff. It's one thing to decrypt it, but reprogramming it into something else that just locks everybody out. Like those are the things that are worrisome to me about the future of how things could unfold if they were in the hands of the wrong person. But ultimately for me, I'm more on the positive side of AI, just for the, I guess the efficiency part of it. It just makes everything faster, easier, so things get completed, and you've got more time to be creative and build things, so that it doesn't take so long to put, as just a manual example, a hardwood floor down, manually yourself, whenever a robot could do it, much faster. It's like, do you really want to have to do that yourself, or have a robot do it faster? So I know I kind of
that
danced
was all
on
over
a
the
few
place.
different things.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So first, to give you some assurance, that was very movie plot-esque, by the way. But the one thing I can tell you is that the days of kind of the mass shutdown, I predict are largely over. Conficker was probably one of the last, what I would call wasted capabilities, because Conficker was a worm that infected PCs globally. It operated for years and years and years and was never used. It was almost like an exercise in like, let's prove we can do this, that type of an attack. There is so much money to be made in either brokering of exploits for vulnerabilities or the direct application of them. So, and think, not just nation states, but in addition to that, exceptionally financially motivated people. So it's unlikely that everything would ever get shut down. That's my prediction, because there's just too much money to be made in doing sniping specific targets as opposed to just broadly exploiting everything on the internet. Sure. So there's that. But when you factor in, other aspects of it, so for example, you mentioned like quantum, being a threat computationally. Much of that's described by, is protected by a standard called AES. And AES is just a standard. It's not a specific encryption algorithm. You mentioned some hashing algorithms. So both of those, by the way, are used to verify things, but you can't actually really harden things with those. There's a methodology called rainbow tables where you preemptively do hashing of every possible string of characters, and then you do very fast lookups. And quantum will make that happen trivially. What is probably a bigger threat once quantum happens is the ability, if someone had the ability to record communications that were encrypted and then take what used to take, say, 100 million years to do an attack against it, where they're just literally trying every possible key sequence. Think of it as like a brute forcing of a password. It's the same idea. That's where quantum will start to be a threat. But again, quantum technologies are incredibly expensive. We're talking,
Sure.
$1 million a month electric bill just to get started. That type of resource would be required. So you're talking about people who are incredibly well resourced, and that limits it also to probably people who have a Navy and, wear a military uniform to work and things like that. And I can tell you, you can make yourself too hard to hack, You can live your life to where you're uninteresting and no point to hack, but you really can't go out and take your name off of a dry erase board in a targeting office from some nation-state actor. So if somebody is determined, that isn't going to save you, and quantum is only going to make their job easier in the sense of time, so then it becomes your job to kind of, resist that. Now, what can regular people do? My advice is don't put it online if it doesn't need to be online. Like, don't put your refrigerator on the internet, for starters. But if you do, make use of what are features known as VLANs, which is a virtual LAN. It's a way to segment your home network into areas of what you could think of as utility. So all of your IoT, which is your thermostat, your refrigerator, your coffee maker, these types of devices, put them on a network of their own so that they're not on the same network as the rest of your stuff. So that way, if while you're using, say, I see you're using a Windows device here, if you happen to get infected, if this device does, which statistically it will, relative to, say, Mac OS or Linux or some other operating system. But keep this device off of the network where the rest of your more easily, and I would argue much more easily, compromised things are, like your thermostat. Because there's not a lot of penetration testing exercises done on these kind of IoT devices. Now, are VLANs easy to understand? They're not. It's a feature that's often not used by many people in their small office home, small office, home office devices, SOHO devices, but those capabilities are there in a lot of consumer-grade equipment. But look at making use of that type of stuff. Look at your egress policies. Don't have a nothing comes in but anything can go out approach. So if you segment your network and have one part of your IP addresses can reach the internet, don't allow your thermostat to reach the internet. If you have a Apple ecosystem, for example, only one of your devices needs to actually get to the internet in the sense of being able to be used as a HomeKit hub. So limit, which of those things can talk to the internet. Don't let your smart plugs on the same network that reaches the internet. Stuff like that. Again, though. We're back to the same problem, though, is go out and ask people how does email work. They're not going to be able to tell you, and they use that every day. So now go ask them how a VLAN works. Unlikely.
Yeah, that's great feedback. It's really interesting. So back to the quantum thing. I know that it was a National Institute of Standards. They mentioned there's like 4 algorithms to, I guess, really safeguard, 3 of which were contributed by IBM. So I'm just, thinking from your position, from security, making sure everybody's safe, whether it's a company, whether it's a consumer. The vulnerability really, I guess, is my question. Is it something that people should really be concerned about? You just gave us some great measures for the consumer. What about for the business? If you have like very large managed databases, as an example, is there anything that we can do as business owners to further protect that data? You've got like SOC 2 compliance to make sure, very sensitive data sets, HIPAA compliant data sets or FCRA, financial type stuff, credit data, what are you seeing in that particular space on the commercial side?
So things like NIST, SOC, ISO 27001, all of these standards that you described, right? They are all regulatory components, none of which dictate specific technologies. They dictate specific efforts, many of which you can even just accept as not getting there and still get these certifications. So, and you mentioned kind of IBM, being, the big blue component where they provided, 3/4 of all of them. I kind of get the argument there to where like, hey, how much do we trust IBM? But let me ask you, like, how much do you trust these governing bodies who do these determinations? I would encourage you to Google and see who awards AES. It's the NSA. So now, are they picking the one they can crack the easiest? We'll never know, right? Are they working with only mathematicians who promise that no one can break it, but actually they've provided them information that it can, we'll never know, right? So this comes down to ideas like what degree of diligence can you apply to ensuring that your data is hardened, right? So if you can't trust anyone, then don't store it, for starters. If you want to limit to those who you want to trust, let's say you do want to trust the AES standard, and you're required to because it's you're in a regulated business, so be it. Well, then, in particular, if you're a CISO or if you're a CIO or CTO, it's your obligation to track the trending for competing algorithms as they start to present themselves in AES. Do they withstand mathematic rigor? Do they withstand deployment in the wild? And like I said, AES is a moving target. I think presently, I'm not sure the current one, but it may be Diffie-Hellman is actually what is technically AES. There have been other ones, Blowfish. There's all kinds of encryptions that have competed to be AES, and again, AES being just a label. So it's your job to track, like, what are the competing technologies? Should we be migrating from whatever standard of AES we have today to a new one? Should we do it earlier than maybe the rest of the industry has adopted?
Right.
Perhaps you should. At the end of the day, this comes down to appetite for risk, first and foremost, technical competence. Obviously don't encrypt your stuff with with something that nobody in your organization knows how to use. But then after that, it has to come down in your willingness to subscribe to technologies that you don't fully understand.
Sure,
Not just because of regulation, though, but you have to, be able to go to sleep at night. Again, all human element stuff.
So I got one final question for you, David. When it comes to hardware and I guess really what's going to, truly support, this whole open AI, ChatGPT, world that we're now living in, who do you think is furthest along? Is Microsoft? There's a lot of news about Microsoft right now. IBM is doing their thing. So I'm just curious what your take is on who's going to win that hardware race to really be the biggest dog on the street.
In the United States, my money's probably on NVIDIA, maybe closely followed by Intel. All of the companies that you just mentioned, none of them are really in the hardware business with the exception of Apple. I don't know necessarily that ARM64, the platform that Apple focuses on, I don't know necessarily how equipped it is for this type of specific application. They're making more of a general application, not GPU in the sense of graphic processing, but GPU as in general processing. Intel may or may not start to catch up. Their CPU designs are split where half of the CPU die is dedicated to kind of general use, and the other half is dedicated to what's you consider as floating point math, because that type of math is much harder for the CPU computationally.
Right.
But the folks that are really focused on specialization for this application is NVIDIA. They have a huge head start on most everybody else, at least by my measure. And my understanding, again, with a high-performance computing background, is that gives them a huge head start over everybody else. All of those other folks, though, like Microsoft is working with farms of, ASICs that are designed to do specific tasks. Much of that stuff is probably made by Intel. Amazon's cloud stuff, many of that stuff, those are GPU farms. Those are very likely NVIDIA dies that are employed doing this processing. So on the hardware front, I think there's really only two players in the United States. I don't know that Fujitsu is going to catch up. They're another major player. They're one of the few people in the world who still can do large vector computation. Vector is a much harder, similar to the floating point thing, but they kind of survived that. We used to have a company here in the United States called Alpha who did vector stuff, but they really got blown away by Fujitsu. So we'll see if they start to pivot and adjust for that. They're still making a lot of money doing doing like vehicle crash simulations, nuclear test computation, and like protein folding, and they're still making enough money doing linear calculations that lend themselves well to that. ChatGPT, large language models, generative AI, and things, they don't lend themselves very well to those types of CPUs. And so, like I said, if if you were to look at my portfolio, I'm pretty heavy on NVIDIA.
So NVIDIA and Fujitsu.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Fujitsu outside of the United States. There's laws relative to the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II that prevents them from doing certain types of business still in the United States. So there are certain applications of their technologies that aren't allowed in the United States because of this antiquated law,
sure.
Which is taken largely advantage of by Intel, I would say, but which I don't blame them.
Right.
If the government puts headwinds out and you can make a sale, then good for you. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Well, those are great answers. And David, thank you so much for being on the show. Like, I always learn something new from you.
Thanks for having us here.
David's a very smart guy. So if you guys want to get in touch with David, there'll be a link in the bottom of the video. Team Cymru, David Monnier, thank you so much, brother.
Thanks for having us.